welcome everyone. Fantastic to see you all, and some old faces and new faces, to the annual PPA support group in-person meeting. So welcome. It's a fantastic thing I can be here for this. I'm really hoping that we'll all of your needs very well, straighten up very well, I think.
Can you turn the microphone? Yes.
I will if I can. I don't know where control to do that is.
No.
I shouldn't have to do this. We like to try and shout.
You've got to really shout.
Yeah.
Karaoke.
I have rapid accented speech, so I'm going to try very hard to temper the rapidity, but the accent I can't do much about. So just yes, you say if you're struggling to understand what I'm saying, the important stuff will all be written down. But it is a short talk after the housekeeping. Okay. So with the housekeeping, first and foremost, to flag up, we've got the RDS Vendor Support team here. I don't know, we might need to identify themselves if they're around. Nikki, who's handing the microphone. Is that any better?
Yes.
Emma, Claire, Karen, Bridget, and Sita. So that's the RDS team. They're here to help, and we'll hear more from them later today. The theme of the meeting, we always try to have a theme. The theme of the meeting really is support roles, okay, and the sort of things that are available, because it can get very confusing, particularly for new punters, to know what everyone's roles are. And we wanted today to show some examples of how you can actually get practical support and help. And they are central to that. From the sublime to the not so sublime, the toilets are in the foyer. There's an accessible toilet on the first floor, you can get to via a lift, and an emergency exit at the front of the building. There's no fire alarms planned, so if there's an alarm, that would be a real thing, you'll have to all exit. To let everyone know, we're planning to film just the talks. Okay, so it's, in case anybody's got any issues with that, they'll be edited after, and we'll add them to our website, so that they'll be available for people to come back to if there are things that you miss or that you want to go back to later. And also very important, there's an online feedback form. Okay, so we really want your feedback about all parts of the process, because if it's not useful for you, it's not useful. So that's, at the end of the day, we want to hear from you. Now, we've talked before, we've got a lot of feedback in the past, from past meetings, about people who come to this group, because you're probably the most diverse, clinically diverse of all of our rare dementia support groups, in the sense that there's at least 3, and probably a lot more different types of PPA, all embedded, sitting in this room, and we're letting those in the people that are sort of not able to join today. So it would be very nice if we could have separate kind of tailored, bespoke facilities, breakout rooms, etc. for people living with those different types of PPA, because we're not suggesting that this is all just one disease, which is an example in my talk in a few minutes. But unfortunately, we can't do that at the moment. But watch this space. We have a brand new, probably some of the most exciting news on the Dementia Research Centre front for many years. A brand new rare dementia support centre about to be refurbished on Woburn Place. It's a fantastic building, listed building. We're allowed to do various things to the interior of the building to make it friendly for people that might want to use a rare dementia support centre. And the work is about to begin. We're in the active planning stage of that. The rare dementia support team and Seb Crutch, who some of you will have encountered, I'm sure, are kind of leading the way. There's a lot of people being consulted, and also lay stakeholders as well. So very exciting news. projected to open, as the way with buildings, but can never guarantee, but projected to open this summer next year, so 25. So we're going to really look using that kind of facility to see whether we can have much more bespoke support for people. We've got, as many of you will know, regional support. So there are specific professionals around the country which work with PPA, regional network hubs and other forms of prepared dementia, and their partnerships that usually try to blend local knowledge, very valuable thing, with the sort of more centralised knowledge that we have and the experience of the rare dementia support group team. The first one is in Bath. I know it's telling me it's due to start in the autumn, and but there's talks with groups much further afield, Liverpool, Manchester, Scotland, so big regional centres. And we're hoping to have 7 of these regional centres all over the country established. So big changes afoot, which we hope will be transforming what we can offer. Meetings like this. Bookings, we've used Eventbrite. Thank you very much, everyone who's done that and bore with us. It does actually make it practical. It will be very difficult given the scale of this meeting, and it is, as you can see, virtually standing room only. We've got over 1,600 members now of the PPA support group, which is quite amazing. The backer for all of this is the underwriter for all of this is the National Brain Bill. Representatives of whom will also be visible today. So we thank all of them as always for making all of these sorts of events possible. We're just to say that, to let you know that the rare dementia support framework, Nikki's team will talk to you some more about that, but it's had to adjust to this very large and ongoing increase in membership. One of the ways that they're responding to that is to start a virtual support clinic. So we'll probably hear some more about that today, which will be available to offer advice through the week. It's more difficult to offer a true crisis service, and that blurs into other things, but they will try to have a rapid response from that clinic. So that's another development just to be aware of. There are online PPA peer support groups, and 2 that are dedicated to family and carers online to try and build accessibility. We've also got future meetings planned online, so webinars rather than live meetings, but we do also have a live Q&A session planned. The date will be set for that. So the in-person meeting is fantastic, but it's not the only thing. There are online things planned, and I know from previous discussions, particularly during the pandemic, that it can be quite polarising because some people love the face-to-face, but other people find it hard to get to, and other people don't much enjoy the technology, prefer the face-to-face. So just please bear with us. We're trying to cater for different things. Now you're all coded. I think the colour codes may have changed, just to keep everybody on their toes. But we're happy to try and help if you're not sure which code you're meant to belong to. And in cases of uncertainty, we've designated that today as yellow. People who might have yellow should not be feeling in any way marginalised because, I'm in this, because I've just reviewed a study that was done by a very reputable centre, another centre, not ours, of PPA, and over 30% of their group had this unclassified, and it's getting more and more as we go along. So I'd say that you're not quite the majority, but you're in very good company if you're in yellow. And we'll talk some more about that. I mentioned on the way through the National Brain Bill, so I think Shivani, is Shivani in the room? There she is. Thank you, Shivani. So she will be particularly available at lunchtime. If you want to sort of talk about any suggestions for creative new fundraising activities, anyone wants to run a marathon, watch someone else run a marathon, I do, hold a bake sale, organise a concert we've had numerous things about Lyme in the past, but all I hear is, well, Shivani is the person to collect those for you. Right, so the agenda, you're hearing enough from me. I'm about to segue very shortly into an introductory talk. Then at around 11:30, we've got this very interesting conversation camp, which is being run by Dr. Volkmer, who many of you will know. She'll hold up her hand, come on down, Anna, which is involving some May stakeholders as well. And then 12:10, the UK Speech and Language Therapy PPA Network, so Anna will speak to that. And then I think the morning concludes 12:25, Better Living with PPA, the online carer program, which Ollie Hayes will talk about. I don't know if Ollie's around today, but if not, we'll hear from them. Right, lunch. We'll 12:30 to 1:30, we'll go to plan. And then in the afternoon, so this is sort of like one of the core things. We hear from the Red Dimension support team talking about some of the session support, types of support they offer, and the sessions that they offer. It's an interactive session with Claire, Nikki, and Anna. And then we get a brief research update from Ben. Ben's working at the back of the group, Ben Levitt, there he is, who's one of our PhD students on the research side, talking about research in PPA, going into a Q&A, which is the close of the day, where we all kind of be available to take some questions. Often the questions spill over, and that's okay. Very happy to take questions later, things that occur to you as you're leaving the room, and sort of send some supplementary information. And there will be, as I say, at least one other interactive Q&A webinar later in the year. Right. So, without further ado, a short introduction to PPA. What is it? And I appreciate, first of all, many of you are already very expert in this and know far more about this than I do. So I apologise to those people, but it sometimes is useful, particularly for new people coming into this new, very confusing times. I'm sure many of you will remember when you first being told about this diagnosis. So really this is designed to do a bit of an overview. I do appreciate and apologise if it's a bit old hat for some of you. So PPA just means a language-led dementia, a form of dementia where language, speech and language are the earliest and most prominent features. Okay, so that sets it apart from the typical sort of picture that we have, and the media often have of dementia, which is that it's a disease often of very old people with memory problems. Okay, so this is a problem that is not associated in the public mind with dementia in many cases, and this is a big problem because it means that, for example, it's not associated in the minds of many doctors with dementia. So it's very easy for people with this problem to have a delayed diagnosis or a misdiagnosis, which may resonate with some of you, I'm sure. Primary progressive aphasia, it's primary because it's a degenerative disease, a loss of brain cells from the actual language networks of the brain. Secondary forms if you had a brain tumour or something like that. So it's not that, it's a primary disease of those networks, and it gets worse over time, so it's progressive. And it's a problem with language. So we always like the Greek name on these things in neurology, so that means it's an aphasia. So it's a problem due to degeneration of the brain. It gets worse over time. And there are three main varieties, but many exceptions and a lot of overlap between those varieties. We'll see some examples to follow. But what I want to say right from the get-go is that there is a lot more to PPA than language and speech problems. Okay, so yes, they are usually the reason that someone comes along to a doctor first and gets diagnosed, but that's not where this illness ends, and many of you will know this only too well. And the different types of the PPA have different types of needs and additional features that people wrestle with those illnesses. So people can be really wrestling with very different problems, depending on what type of PPA they have. But it's all in the sort of the general rubric of PPA. So, we're trying to teach neurologists really, they need to be very comfortable with this idea that you need to ask a lot more questions and get a much clearer picture of what's going on in someone's life beyond just their ability to communicate. That's a big enough part of it, but it's not just that. And I've listed some examples there, but it goes on. There can be problems with planning, decision making, memory certainly, and other types of cognitive functions, thinking functions. Social and emotional awareness can be affected, behaviour can change, motor and movement control and mobility can be big issues. And all of this is changing over time. That's the progressive bit. So it's a moving target, and this is one of the problems with both diagnosing PPA and also treating and managing it. What is true at one point in time will not be true, maybe even in 6 months, a year's time. And it's a very important sort of fourth dimension that we have to think about these illnesses. Now, we often get asked in clinic, why did this happen to me? And the answer in most cases is we do not know. We do not know why a particular individual person gets PPA in most cases. We understand a lot now about the pathology in the brain, changes that happen there, but we don't, in most cases, know what the triggering event was, other than desperately bad luck. They are rare diseases, and this is also a problem because most neurologists, let alone most GPs, will not see them, or will see them once in a blue moon. So it's a rare disease, and it's a frustrating situation because you would think it should be possible to find some risk factor or some way of preventing the illness, but so far we haven't. So that's another sort of research, very, very big sort of research focus. Just occasionally, we do know the answer, and that's because there's an abnormal gene. But in the vast majority of people with PPA, it's not inherited. So of all the things to worry about PPA, in most cases, you at least don't have to worry that this is going to be something that can be passed on to the next generation. Unfortunately, there are exceptions, as always in medicine, there are exceptions. And I do apologise if you happen to be someone who's living with that exception, but in general, that's true of these diseases. They're what neurologists would call sporadic diseases. And they do get more common with age in the sense that we don't really see 30-year-olds getting PPA. But you don't see, as this group will prove, you don't see very old people necessarily getting PPA. Of course, very old people can get PPA, but they often seem to strike people in late middle life, which of course is the time where people have still got lots of responsibilities, working, families, sometimes young families, lots of other things going on in their lives. They're not currently curable illnesses, as I'm sure everyone sitting in this room is all too aware. But that is not the same as saying that they're not treatable illnesses. So we can't halt or reverse the process in PPA. That's one of the research activities. But we can manage it. So the real challenge is to how can you help this individual person with PPA live as well as possible with the illness for as long as possible with the illness. And we don't mean they're just functioning. We mean actually deriving enjoyment from life, retaining independence, dignity, autonomy, and doing the things that they like to do. And this is a massive challenge, and this is why we have experts whose main expertise is just in this. So the RDS team, Anna Volkmer and others, in some ways their main interest is in just that. So neurologists tend to be good, or I think they're good at diagnosing, but have a very bad reputation for, after that, shrugging and saying, well, we've diagnosed you. You may all recognise that, some of you may recognise that. But that should not be where the process ends. That's the start of the process with PPA, not the end. And of course, I'd like to put a plug, and I am talking to some extent preaching to the choir, but it would be very, very nice if we could get as many people as possible into research, think of it as fighting back against the illness, doing something very active against this illness. so that you can hopefully one day stop other people being in your situation. So I promised I would say something about the three main varieties. So the three main varieties come broadly speaking from different parts of the brain. So this is kind of the side view of the left side of the left hemisphere of the brain, which is the part of the side of the brain that does language in most people. And the three main varieties we talk about non-fluent, and basically these are people who have problems with talking. They have problems getting words out, it's very effortful for them to do that, and when the words come out, they have errors. They may also have problems with their grammar, putting and stringing words together. So it can be problems at the level of the individual words, and also putting the words together. The so-called semantic variant, which is really not really an aphasia at all. It's a problem with the memory system in the brain, the semantic memory system. Now, most of the time we think about memory, we think about the brain system that allows you to know what you did yesterday, what you did a year ago, keep track of events, appointments. So that's the type of memory that we normally think about as memory. We talk about dementia and Alzheimer's. But this is a different memory system that's affected in semantic variant. So this is the memory system that is memory for words, what they mean, and also the meaning of other types of objects, knowledge about what things look like visually, what things sound like, and also knowledge about other people and what the signals they are giving you actually mean. And that's non-verbal signals, for example, emotional signals. So all of those things are vulnerable in semantic variant. So it's much broader than just aphasia, but because language is such a difficult, complicated task for the brain, it tends to show up as a language problem first. It used to be called semantic dementia, and you'll still find that term being used, but the semantic variant. And then the newest one, the one that was the last to be, if you like, put on the map, is this sort of slightly at the back and sort of in the middle there, at the back of the left side of the brain. So semantic is in the front, in the what we call the temporal lobe. Logopedic is at the back. And this is the one that comes from the Greek word for few words, where people lose the thread of what they're saying. They often have pauses where they're trying to remember. They have a tip of the tongue. They can't quite get the word. They know what they want to say. They can't get it out. And they also have other problems with just keeping information online. So their mind's here. If you say, can you remember that PIN number or that phone number? No, it's gone. So it's that kind of just sort of keeping talking going, which is a problem with logopedic aphasia. Now this is a too complicated slide, but it's there mainly just to indicate that it is complicated. So there's more to these illnesses than just the speech and language. What we need to watch out for, I've circled some of the things. We need to watch out, first of all, for early features, so things that might help us know whether somebody is actually getting PPA rather than just aging or worried about their memory. How do we know this could be started PPA? We look for things like errors, action errors that people might be making, things like spelling errors. Difficulties with hearing. You might think, well, isn't that just all about sort of my ears? No, this is problems with brain hearing. Okay, there's sorts of hearing that we use when we want to make sense of information in a busy scene or something like that, where you're sort of trying to follow when someone's talking over background noise. That kind of hearing often changes quite quickly. That's sort of common to many different types of PPA. Then the different subtypes have certain particular things we watch out for. So in the case of the non-fluents, we particularly have to watch out for mobility, balance issues, symptoms a bit like Parkinson's disease, but it isn't Parkinson's. We call it Parkinson's plus. Those can be major challenges, and with that sort of motor movement-related problem, problems with swallowing can be a problem. In the case of the semantic variant, we particularly have to watch out for changes in behaviour, and this is due to that problem I mentioned before, which is problems reading and interpreting other people's signals particularly, and that can cause big issues with particularly social and emotional awareness. In the case of the logopedic variety, we need to watch out for a more general problem with cognition, and that's because this variety is usually a form of Alzheimer's disease, and it tends to develop those features which look a bit more like Alzheimer's as it goes along, and that can take a number of years. All of these diseases are unfolding over a number of years, and there are always these generalizations are always exceptions. So you may well be somebody that's noted particular problems outside of that simplified formulation, and that's absolutely okay. We see that. This is just to show you that when we do tests in PPA, what neurologists are trying to do is sort of get those patterns pinned down. So the top, sort of those radar diagrams, as we call them, that's your kind of neuropsychological memory testing. If you come into the clinic and you sit down with a neuropsychologist for an hour, 90 minutes, and have all your detailed language memory testing, we score you all up. The shapes are different. The shapes are really a map of the cognitive landscape of the syndrome, so we can see the differences when we do the formal memory testing, just as we can at the bedside. Then we see different patterns of brain scan changes, which is one of the reasons we do brain scans. We're looking for evidence for particular PPA changes. And also, the pathology of the brain is different, and they have particular sorts of proteins which get deposited in the brain networks, which differ between the different types of PPA. Protein tau, the non-fluents, this other protein called TEP in the semantics, and Alzheimer's proteins in the case of the ROCTs. It's the usual way it goes. And that coloured cartoon at the end there, that's showing the different brain networks which get affected in each of these different varieties. And you can probably see that they're not all in the same place. They're in different places, and that's not random. That's telling us that these proteins, these things that actually cause PPA, are going to different parts of the brain. And that's what causes the different symptoms that we see. There are lots of exceptions, awkward exceptions that don't fit. They may bear a surface similarity, but once a neurologist sort of sits down and spends some time with you, it becomes clear that you don't quite belong to that one group. And that can be awkward and make you feel a bit left out, like Pippa there, and that has tea party. Now, the names that get applied to this group of diseases, they're notoriously difficult. Neurologists struggle to keep up with them. Many GPs have never heard of them, and that really is a very, very unfair situation to put someone into who suddenly come along to the clinic, and someone says you've got PPA, and they put another string of names to that. And then you might see another doctor say, oh, well, I think you've got frontotemporal dementia. Or, well, you might have Pick's disease. Oh, I think you might have a corticobasal syndrome. You know, can you make up your minds? They may all be talking about the same thing. So I'll leave you to suggest that figure that's showing the overlap, okay, between the different names. They're all names. They're just names. Neurologists tend to find them more or less helpful. But what you can probably see, or hopefully see, is the coloured circles there, or the coloured oblongs there. They overlap. Okay, so you've got, you know, on the one hand, you've got several different syndromes of frontotemporal dementia, which includes both the semantic and the non-fluents. But then you've got different types of Alzheimer's disease, which includes logopenics, and yet the logopenics, the semantics, and the non-fluents all get put together in the PPA category. By the way, these slides will be shared, so you don't have to feel you need to photograph them. And then this lot over here, the so-called PSP, progressive supranuclear palsy, or corticobasal syndrome, some of you might have had mentioned in clinic, they are Parkinson's plus syndromes. They're syndromes that produce motor changes a bit like Parkinson's disease, and they particularly overlap with the non-fluent. So, despite the fact that terminology is very confusing, there may not necessarily be inconsistency when people start using these different terms. They may just be referring to different parts of that diagram. So the last slide I have is really just bringing up this point, which of course you'll hear a lot more about for the rest of the day today, so I won't dwell too much on it. But our mission is to live well with PPA, or help you live well with PPA. What are some things that you need to be thinking about, we need to be helping you to think about right from the start? Planning ahead, okay? So planning ahead, you know, Right? But I mean things like power of attorney, financial arrangements, wills, things like that. That certainly has its virtues and is a very important thing, but you don't want to over sort of think it. It's very, very difficult to plan ahead by anything more than about 6 months with this illness. They're so variable and they're changing all the time. So I normally say to people in clinic, think about 6-month blocks. Don't think about what will be going on in 2 years or 5 years. It's too difficult. I can't honestly tell you that. That's another research activity that we've looked at. At the moment, we struggle in the individual person to give you reliable information beyond about 6 months. And I would suggest further than that, the mission is to live in days, right? So it's a quote I like is Philip Larkin, where else can we live but days? And he was right. With days, you need to be thinking what is going to make today as successful as possible. We're after the maintenance of independence and enjoyment in life. Working, driving, very important, travelling more generally beyond driving, socialising with friends and family, interests, getting going. Capacities, what can people still do? Just because you have a diagnosis of PPA does not mean your brain stops working, that your life stops. What can you still do? And of course research is part of that. And optimise the function. So yes, of course we've got some basic functions we have to ask about, but how can we get those working as well as possible? Speech and language therapy, communication aids, the use of devices, which I know some of you have made a lot of use of, electronic digital devices, getting hearing checked and corrected, occupational therapy assessments of your house, of your living arrangements, physiotherapy for mobility. Behavioural interventions may also be useful, and I don't mean highfalutin things, I can mean really quite simple things. Puzzles, music, things like this. But you really need the benefit of practical experience. It's very difficult to intuit all of this just out of your own heads. And this is where I think a group like this can be really helpful, because there are people who have been there and already have come up with their own ways of managing, which they can very generously share with you. We always need to be alert to treatable things. The illness as a whole is not curable, but there are things in there often which can be cured and reversed. Mood, anxiety, often big problems, swallowing problems, mobility and balance problems, prevention of risks to life and limb and also finances and other things. There's a fairly limited role for medicines, that's true, but we have a pretty low threshold in our clinic for giving people a trial of Alzheimer's medication. So you could say, well, that's mainly for the people with logopenic aphasia, and that's true. But even people, particularly with the non-fluent form, we often give it a go. Okay, so you may, certainly if you come to our clinic, you may end up having a discussion about medicines. But the medicines that we have for PPA are just not very effective at the moment. They're mainly designed to try to help a little bit, and they may actually help with things like memory more than they help with things like speech, for example, although we hope that they may have some impact on that too. And don't be afraid to ask for help. So I take your being here today as a very good sign, because that's what we ought to be here for, and that's what this group is here for. But closer to home, GP is crucial and central to coordinating a lot of the things that we want to try and make happen for you. You can't often do that from Queen Square. You can have helpful hints, goads, reminders and encouragement, but it's hard to actually instantiate, activate things from Queen Square. So the GP, very important. Occupational can be very important for younger people, but also financial solicitors, things like wills and capacity assessments, engaging social services. And don't forget, there's a massive emotional component. And you could say, well, of course they don't forget that. But what tends to happen is, we all get, medics included, very fixated on physical things, which in some ways are easier to talk about. The emotional dimension to these illnesses is huge, and the people that live with people with PPA and care for them and love them are also carrying a very, very heavy emotional cost. So we're very keen to explore sometimes very simple ways that they can be supported better, because without carers and supporters, people with PPA do not do as well, and they are vital to the whole enterprise. So I want to leave you with a sort of a thought. When you get one person with PPA, you get one person with PPA. So you're all different, unique. The illnesses are notoriously variable between individuals, which is both a challenge and an opportunity for those of us that are trying to help people live with these illnesses. But there's no kind of one-size-fits-all straitjackets. They should be left on the door. We're all individuals, in the words of Monty Python. So with that, I think I'll hand over, running over slightly over time, I'm sorry, to Anna.
Thank you so much, Professor Warren. So there's a few of us come up now, talking today. So I'm going to move on to our introduction slide. You can see here on the slide a beautiful piece of artwork. And there's some examples of the artwork we produced, and we're going to talk a bit about the artwork, but they're in the space around the refreshments. And I'm going to talk today with some of the people I work with on this about what we call the Better Conversations camps. So, I'm a speech and language therapist. What do I mean by conversation? When people come to speech therapy, they don't tend to come to speech therapy and say, I want to work on 10 words, okay? They come to speech therapy and they say to me, I want to be able to talk to my wife, or my husband, or my daughter. I want to tell them what I think about the election, or the football. I want to tell them my opinion. I want to tell them how I feel. Or I let people say to me, I want to know how my dad, mum, wife feels. Communication, conversation shapes our lives, not single words, conversation. And unfortunately, primary progressive aphasia kind of disrupts it. It creates a barrier. Now, one of the really important things about conversation, I would say, is we don't tend to do it on our own. Usually, unless we're talking in the mirror, hopefully, usually we do it with another person. So, a real challenge about working on conversation is that as a speech therapist, I can't just work with the person with PPA. I have to work with other people in the conversation. And over the years, I've been working as a speech therapist now for 25 years, most of that with people with PPA. And I've found people say, I want to have, and we want to have, better conversations. Now, when people come to me in therapy, often, when I was employed in the NHS, that was in a white room, you know the kind, maybe green because it's a hospital, and people coming into the hospital, and it was really hard. They'd come in and we might do something that was great in the therapy, but then people go out into their real lives, where there's music in the background, or someone doesn't know they have PPA. Does this sound familiar? Or, there's a knock on the door, or you're actually trying to cook dinner at the same time. So one of the things I really wanted to think about is how we could make speech therapy work in real conversations. Now, the evidence, what does the evidence? I'm a good speech therapist, so I have to look at the evidence. And the evidence tells us that, and this is the most writing you'll see on the slide, the top writing is an article that we published where we did this, we worked on conversation, and I did it with a couple, we did it online because it was in the pandemic. So I know, for starters, that I can do speech therapy. I don't have to be sat face to face with somebody. I know sometimes, for some people, we can do it online. And we call that tele-health or tele-partner training. The second paper was a big study that I did for my PhD, and I'm still doing that work, where we invited couples with primary progressive aphasia and we invited them to come and work on conversation with us. And we call conversation, speech therapy for conversation, we call it communication partner training. And looking around the room, there's lots of familiar faces, beyond some of the ones I'm going to pick, bring up to the front. So I know some of you have done this therapy with me. And in this trial, we showed that actually people do quite like this therapy. And it seems to help people achieve their goals of having better conversations. But I was just working with couples, so in twos. They were saying, how can we get it to work in our real lives with our other friends? And they also said to us, some of the people said we need more. So I thought, how much more do they need? Some people said, just 1 hour a week is really quick, and then I've forgotten it all by next week. Even the partners, it was more just life gets in the way. And that's really important, because it wasn't just the people with PPA saying that, it was the partners saying that as well. Does that make sense? So, I looked at what goes on for other, there's people with stroke aphasia also have language difficulties, and they get speech therapy. So I looked at what they were doing there, and this was quite interesting. And they find that doing therapy in a group, people talked even more. And people didn't just talk, they used other ways of communication, and they talked about lots of different things, right? That's normal life. You don't just talk about one thing, especially, and in the speech therapy sessions, you probably end up talking about speech therapy, or they talked about lots of things. And when they did these groups in stroke aphasia, they did groups online. They also saw that people talked more, so it worked online. So we were rather inspired. They also had what they call camps, which sounds very exciting, like going on holiday. They're doing lots of that kind of thing for people with stroke aphasia. And I thought, why can't we do that? Why can't we invite people with PPA and their family members in small groups to work on conversation? So, although I'm not able to work in the NHS anymore, we've done a very new, recent project we wanted to share with you called Conversation Camps. And to do that, I enlisted lots of people to help, and some of whom are standing here. We have Alice and Elizabeth, who are 2 speech and language therapy students. Because I work at the university with students, I thought, let's get the students to help us out. That would be really helpful. And I should say there's 2 other people who can't be, well, 3 other people who can't be here today, 3 other speech therapists. Rosemary Townsend, who you may know of. She's a bit poorly today, but she helped us out. We had Dr. Suzanne Beek and Dr. Phil Beckley. And we had Ma Rana, who is an artist, and she's going to talk about the work she did, because I think what we really wanted to do was get out of just speaking into speaking about stuff. Because people told us it's really hard to know what to talk about. So we thought this would be quite inspiring. So this was our first go. So I'm going to hand over to Alice and Elizabeth, who are going to tell you what we actually did on the camp. Okay, so here we go.
Okay, so in week 1, we had 4 days, which was roughly 4 hours per day of therapy time with some breaks in between. So on the first day, we spent a lot of time getting to know each other as couples and between facilitators as well. And we asked everyone to bring in an important object to them to just get to know them a bit more. And then we sat with couples individually and asked them to review their video conversations and set some targets based on what they saw from their video conversations. And then on the second day, as a group, we reviewed all of the targets that we'd set as couples and rated their importance, how important they felt each target was to them. And then in the afternoon, we spent some time with Moa and did a collaborative group project of creative activity, which I think you may have seen in the area where the refreshments are. And then on the third day, we did some more online, it was all online, and we did some more artwork with Dr. Phil Beckley, using Zoom and Annotate, talking about important spaces to us. And then in the afternoon, again, we used some objects and some photos to talk about places and spaces that were important to everyone in the group. And then on the fourth day, we spent some time doing some conversation practice in each kind of couple, and there was a bit of time to gather feedback from everyone else in the group about what went well and what was maybe difficult about that conversation. And the afternoon we spent talking about different perspectives of places around us.
So we did 2 weeks. You can see how much we covered in 2 weeks. Here's the second week.
So the second week we started online, and in the morning we talked about social networks. So everyone reflected on who they were having conversations with, whether that had changed, and whether there were people that actually they wanted to have more conversations with, and a little bit of problem solving about how maybe we could expand our social networks. And in the afternoon, we had a counselling session just for the partners, people at PPA. Giving them space to reflect on the changes that had taken place, the support that they already had, and also the support that they felt that they would need. And then we were online again for the next day, and we did some group conversation practice where 2 couples had a conversation while the rest of us watched, and then reflected on how it went and gave some feedback. And in the afternoon, it was people with PPA on their own, without their partners. And we had lots of photos of places, as this group had travelled a lot. And we had conversations about these places and tried to encourage communication within the group, not just verbally. And then we were back in person, and we did some group conversations, again this time in person, and reflected on what can help group conversations. And in the afternoon, we had a little scavenger hunt. We went around the university building, trying to find different places. And then finally, on the last day, we went over everyone's goals and thought about how well people had done with their goals, what they wanted to continue working on, and then we all went for a really nice meal. So that was a speedy tour. I probably don't need the microphone. My voice is rather loud and piercing, apologies. So that was a speedy tour. You can see how much we did, but we wanted to hone in on a few things. So this is an example of how we got to know each other, because we think it's really important to get to know each other, to be able to do work together. So on the first day, we invited people to bring in an object so they could tell everyone something about themselves. So it wasn't just, sometimes it's really hard to explain something about yourself in words, but when you have an object to show what that thing about yourself, we know that people can say more, and we know that other people around them can often help by asking questions or making observations. Does that make sense? So we thought not just using speaking to have conversations, but objects would be helpful. We also we didn't just speak about ourselves. We actually, one of the things that we did, although we all came in couples, this is a bit contentious, we swapped. So we swapped couples, and that was a really good way to get to know each other, because people then had to kind of find out a little bit about one another, and you can see there we had
paper and pens and photos. And then we kind of developed like a bio. So we had a little description of everybody and we shared it with the group. Does that make sense? And I should say there were 5 couples who did the group. And so we found out something about all these 5 couples and we all shared something about ourselves. And of course, as I said earlier, we don't just talk on our own. Often we don't just talk to one other person. We may have other people around us, like our neighbours, perhaps some adult children or some friends maybe. So sometimes it's useful to help practice in a group. So we practiced group conversations, and it's really important to talk about practice, because I could say, speak slowly, which I do. I tell my colleagues to speak slowly. And my colleagues say, yeah, I'll speak slowly. But speaking slowly is really difficult. It requires practice. So anything that we decide to work on in therapy needs lots of practice. That's why we need this group, because we need opportunities to practice. And we even practice at a restaurant. We went for a lovely meal at the end of it. And I'm going to hand over to Ma now, who's going to speak a little bit about the art, because I think that's one of the most exciting things we did.
Thanks, Anna. So I did 2 sessions of, I guess, an art making intervention. And I guess I should also say I come with experience of being a carer for my mother who had dementia, and I'm also kind of completing a PhD working with people, those looking after mothers with dementia, but using crafting as an activity. And often these activities are where people are kind of sat next to each other, engaged with their own sort of creative activity, but not in terms of turn taking. And this is what Anna asked, if I could come up with an activity that replicated this turn-taking aspect of conversation. So I hadn't really done this before, but I thought it was a really interesting proposal. And so I came up with this idea. Well, actually, I kind of used it's Solowit, who American artist who is kind of considered the father of conceptual art and minimal art who's based in America. And he would do these instructions for a wall drawing. And the way that he gives these instructions really kind of aligns quite nicely with the idea of kind of turn-taking, or enable groups of people to be involved in a single, or making a single piece of art. So for an example, an instruction might be one person draws a line across the top piece of paper, and we've got some of the artwork outside. And these lengths of paper, kind of use lining wallpaper, so it's very long strips of wallpaper on the walls. And it was important for me that it could be on the table, but it could be on the wall. So you would, as you're making your mark, or as you're drawing, you're also walking as well. So it's a very kind of interactive way of mark making. So somebody would make a line, just very abstract, and then another person was invited to use whatever art material that we had provided. It could have been pens, paints, crayons, different media, to copy that line underneath it as close as you can, but without touching it. And it's harder than it sounds, especially when it's along maybe a 10-foot length of paper. And what was nice, and I think Solowit calls this butterfly effect, even though you try to follow this line, you sometimes get these interruptions in these turn taking. So this is why the top line, or rather the bottom line, doesn't mirror exactly the top line. And also I'll finish, what was also important for me, that not just the couples took part, but the students and everybody took part in the room, including myself. So it was very much a collaborative activity, and we had different sheets of paper on the wall, on the table, and people were invited to move around and just add their line to the paper.
So we've told you quite a lot about what we did, and I suspect you're thinking, well, how does this help conversations? But as I'm emphasising, all the while we were practising doing conversations. So I'm going to hand over to the students, and they're going to actually just show us the measures, some of the measures we took that changed. And then we're going to hear from the people who actually came to the camp from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So here we go. Practice it.
Okay, so we did inflict quite a lot of assessment and outcome measures on our participants. We won't go through them all. This was the most important, we think. So at the very beginning, the couples set themselves conversation goals. So we've got some examples here from Jeff and Maggie. So this was based on reflecting on a recording of a conversation that they had and looking at what was really helping in the conversation and what maybe they could do more of to help the conversation flow. So for example, the one with the star here was chosen by Jeff as the most important goal for him. So to use the phrase, start again when I'm bogged down when talking. So throughout the 2-week camp, that was something that he was going to work on. Use my word lasso to get to the right word. So some of you might have this idea of climbing up to a word, getting to the word that you're looking for. And then Jeff's wife had this one, use more open questions to give Jeff choice and confidence to answer. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we reflected on how that was going. And here we've got our measurements. So a 2, this is what Jeff gave himself for the first one, was doing it a lot more. So after 2 weeks, he was doing this a lot more. And the other 2 are 0, meaning no change, but this was more because it was already being done when it needed to be done. And here we've got Mike and Jane's goals. Again, most important, take 5 minutes out of each day to sit down and have a cocktail chat. Okay, and yeah, at the end of 2 weeks, I think both of you felt that yes, this was something they were doing a lot more. So making that space to have conversation during the day. And yes, a couple where they were doing it a little bit more at the end of 2 weeks, so using facial expressions or signposting. And finally, one from Jane with a no change, ask a range of questions.
Lovely. So I guess you might, what's really important to show here is that people are making improvements, but people are often surprised when they do this therapy and they look at these videos, they say, I'm actually already doing loads of things I didn't realise. So I think what's really important to note is we want, not only are we looking for improvements, but we're looking for things to stay the same. Professor Warren talked about this being a disease that progresses over time. We want people's interactions, people tell us, I want to keep these precious conversations I have. Does that make sense? So in many ways, we see maintenance as a success, right? So before we invite our lovely participants up, our collaborators, I just wanted to share something. Oh, the slides moved a bit. These, you may see these outside on the tables. So one of the things we did in our group at the end is we painted stones, and June is Aphasia Awareness Month. So there's a big movement to increase awareness of aphasia. You may have seen this, it's happened with other conditions as well, is you paint a little rock, you put hashtag rocking aphasia, and you plant it somewhere in the world for someone to find. And what I really, and we're going to hear from Jane and Mike, maybe they could share, Mike could share where they planted some of their rocks, very far away. And then people might find the rock and look up, what is this thing called aphasia? So we looked inwardly about what we were doing, but we also thought a bit about the wider world. So that's us. This was a lovely pilot that we did. But we're going to invite up Mike, Maggie and Jeff, and Leslie and Matt to tell you a little bit about their experiences. Would you like to come up to the front, and we have some questions prepared that we're going to share with you. I'm going to hand back to Alice.
I've already got my signposting.
the strategy you've already put together. So as Anna said, you've heard about the group from our perspective, but we'd like to invite you all to share your perspective. So firstly, I'll start off with, what was difficult about your conversations before you came to the camp?
I felt as though I've not felt as though I'm initiating more subjects. So, truly, I believe I was not talking to anybody else. All the time I'm thinking how to avoid this. So,
that was before the camp.
yeah. I was planning on taking a tactical fruition. I was thinking about avoiding conversations, a little step at a time. It was my byword.
What about further down the line? What was difficult about your conversations before the camp?
I didn't find anything particularly difficult, I think, because they had already adjusted as Jeff was changing. You find automatically speaking slower, speaking more clearly. So it was certainly different conversations than what it had been. I think more the problem was other people, just speaking with other people rather than with me. People who don't understand, even if you tell them to speak clearly, they carry on chattering as they always have done. I think I've learned to now say, shut up. Give Jeff a chance to finish his sentence. Better at that.
And what about you, Jeff?
I was also like Mike, evading conversation, and I'm still doing it, but I'm trying to initiate and question people.
It sounds like that awareness is, you've got more awareness of it now.
Yes, yes.
What about that, Leslie? What was difficult about your conversations before the camp, do you think?
I'm not very confident.
So you felt your confidence was low?
Yeah, it's just something that we talked about that Leslie had said to me and to the group that with the PPA, it had really knocked your confidence into having conversations. Sorry.
So yeah, you felt your confidence was knocked, and that was a result of kind of your diagnosis. So my next question was just what made you decide that you wanted to come to the camp, and whether you felt it was important to come together as a couple?
Thank you. I said before, a little step at a time. I throw myself in to the deep end. What the hell? Suck it and see. So I made that my byword. So excuse me. A couple of things. So I was totally immersed.
A bit closer.
Okay. it was important to say was totally immersed in the process and should be mandatory for couple. So, yeah.
Having got your partner there was really
Yeah,
important.
yeah.
And what about you, Jeff and Maggie? What was it that you what made you want to come to the camp, and how do you feel about the importance of kind of you coming with your partner?
We seize any opportunity to find out about aphasia, PPA, and to learn and meet other people.
Do you have anything to add at the end?
So I think similar to what Jeff said, when we were talking about it, you especially, Leslie, felt that sense of wanting to contribute.
Yes.
I think on some of the slides earlier, there was talk about it's not something that you can cure, but I think it's really important to take part in things and to feel that you're getting involved and making a contribution, making a difference. That was something you felt.
Yes.
In terms of coming together, that's essential. And in terms of what we wanted to get out of it, I suppose it was meeting other people and learning in tools and techniques.
And since kind of attending the camp and kind of joining us for those 2 weeks, what has changed as a result of that, do you feel, like the conversations?
I initiate more conversations. My control of the conversations is such that I is patience as hell, but I give up because I talk to somebody else. Strike up a new conversation with somebody else.
Okay, so you attract new people now. What about yourself, Jeff and Maggie? Do you feel anything's changed as a result of coming to those 2 weeks?
Before, we didn't really have conversations as such. We would chit chat or say anything that needed to be said. We didn't sit down and have a conversation. We were making more of an effort to do that. I think we've slid a bit lately. We'll get back on track. Just to sit down and talk for the sake of talking isn't really something we used to do.
I think that's something that Mike, you've also identified with your partner as well, kind of having that chit chat, that cocktail chat.
It should be called Chatsworth rather than better conversations, because it's incremental changes that we have made since. I owe Mike the phrase start again. which I adopted since and used this morning.
What about yourselves, Matt and Leslie? Is there anything you feel has changed since attending the camp?
So, one of the things that was used on the course was the idea of using other tools, in particular things like pictures, objects. So one of the things that we do, we were doing it anyway, was going to the pub every week. But actually that's turned out to be quite a nice venue for having conversations. It gets you away from the telly. It's quite a nice environment, it's not too noisy. But one of the things that we enjoy doing, Leslie has a phone there, and I was taking photographs. So we use going through photos from the last week or a couple of weeks as a nice way of sparking conversation, remembering things. It's a nice way to have a conversation. So certainly that's something that we valued from the course, using it to help trigger conversations.
And my final question for you all is, would you recommend coming to the camp? And if you would, why?
Absolutely. I feel as though I've been more confident in myself. So one session stood out for me as was Anna trying to tie me down for goals.
That was your best session?
Yeah.
And what about yourselves, Maggie?
Yeah, well, I think everyone should take any opportunity they can have. You might not know beforehand what you need from the session, but only by coming on can you find out. One thing I would say was it was very tiring. In fact, I think at the end of 2 weeks we were quite exhausted.
So the intense.
Yes, you need to be a bit prepared for that, but yeah, you don't know what you're going to get out unless you try.
Yes, but don't expect miracles. The analysis of your conversations with your partner is very useful. And above all, it's important to meet other people with the same condition.
Yeah.
And probably the coffee breaks and the lunch breaks were mingling together, were as valuable as anything.
So would you recommend the course, and if you would, why would you recommend it?
I would recommend.
Would you recommend it? Yes. Great. That's wonderful. Well, I think that's everything. Thank you all so much. Your vouchers are in the post, or cash, wherever you Thank you so very much to Mike and Jane and Maggie and Jeff and Matt and Leslie and those who weren't able to come along today. You may be wondering
I think it was Mike who said, I think it should be mandatory, which is, I only paid him this morning to say that. I know that I'm anticipating one of your questions will be, how do I see a speech and language therapist? So this type of therapy, we, as you may have seen, we've got wonderful student speech therapists, and I'm working on delivering this with the student speech therapists every single year now, and we'll be trying to increase the number we can offer. But that's not within the NHS, so that will be through a research model and to help the students get their opportunity to meet people with aphasia. There is another organisation called Discover. Rosemary Townsend was hoping to be with us. She offers the same intervention, not intensively, and several speech and language therapists. So we offer training. We train speech therapists in this type of therapy. But in the NHS, we know that on average, a lot of speech therapists aren't able to deliver lots and lots of sessions of speech therapy. So we have a model which is we try and encourage speech therapists to deliver it in at least 4 sessions. We don't know if that's enough, but we're working on that research to find out what is the minimum amount we need. So thank you so much for listening. You're going to hear from me again in a minute about all those speech therapists, but I'm just going to pause so we can give everybody the help. Sorry, it's me again. So I've been asked to talk today a little bit about the network of speech therapists across the UK. And I've been speaking at these events for PPA support since 2015 I first spoke. And every time I come, I get the question, so how do I see a speech therapist? It's a really good question, and it's really difficult to tell you. There's no perfect answer. It is a bit, I will acknowledge it's a bit of a postcode lottery. But one of the things that we're trying to do is to equip speech therapists across the UK. So myself, Rosemary Townsend, and Jackie Kindell, who's a speech therapist in Manchester, we've been working together for the last couple of years, and we set up a UK network of speech and language therapists. And we run the network, we started the network in 2001, but I'm going to take you back a bit to 2016 before I tell you about the network itself. Because in 2016, I started doing research. I've been a speech therapist for many, many years, and I've been working with people with PPA, and I had an opinion. I thought I had a clinical opinion on what I thought I could do to help people with PPA, because there wasn't much research evidence. So one of the things I wanted to know is, what do other speech therapists do, and what do they think? It can't just be me yelling from the rooftops. There have to be other speech therapists. So I surveyed speech therapists across the UK, and one of the things people said was that one of the reasons they weren't always seeing people with PPA is because they weren't commissioned, they didn't have the money, they didn't know what to do, and they weren't always that confident. So, one of the things that we did in 2020, we started an international group, because it's not that we saw that pattern happening across countries around the world. So I have links with speech therapists in the States, Canada, Australia, and actually now we've linked with 20 countries around the world. In every World Health region, so every kind of continent except Africa, we've got members in our group, in our international group, and we wrote these best practice principles to try and help therapists know what to do. But one of the things when we wrote those best practice principles is that we also have to get together locally, because speech therapists in England work in the NHS often, but speech therapists in America don't. So we need to know how to work the NHS. So we made a UK group, and we wanted to have this group together so we could have a place where we could share research, but also share ideas, share ways we could write business plans to get more speech therapists, to share ideas on how to prioritise our services. Does that make sense? To find out how to get the local GPs to know what we do. Because sometimes, many of you may have had the experience that you've been to a GP, what you have is quite unique, and to get to speech therapists, you have to go to your GP. So we were trying to break down some of these barriers. So we started the network in 2021, and we now have over 120 people who we email every month, every couple of months. And we included that we thought we were being generous. We thought we'd include the Republic of Ireland, because geographically they're also in the UK, and we wanted to be inclusive. We meet every 3 or 4 months, and we have about 60 people. We actually met yesterday morning, funnily enough, and we had 61 people on a video call from all of those areas. And 85% of people who come do work in the NHS. And the other people who we also have private therapists come along, and therapists who work for charities who come along. So we're not just trying to help speech therapists who work in the NHS. And I can tell you that when I graduated 25 years ago, only 3% of speech therapists worked in the NHS. We now know that 30% of speech therapists, 3% did not work in the NHS. Now, 30% of speech therapists do not work in the NHS anymore. So there's lots of speech therapists who work privately and for charities now. We wanted to help them as well. What do we cover? Here are some examples. We cover things like actually doing therapy. We talk about working with people with progressive diseases, because lots of speech therapists have got lots of experience working with people with stroke or brain injury, but not always as much experience of working with somebody who's got a progressive disease. We talk about communication partner training like we just described to you now. And we always structure it so we have a presentation, and then we ask the therapist to present talk about a case that somebody they've been working with, so we can all help problem solve. Does that make sense? We work together. And then we all break out into small groups, and we talk about what we can do. So for example, yesterday we were talking about we were talking about communication aids from high to low tech. We were talking about lanyards, pieces of the way you can use laminated sheets, to phones, to tablet devices. And we all broke into groups, and people were saying, brainstorming how they could get their trusts to give them extra money, to help people have access to them, or how they could, even if they could designs. If someone had a really nice design for a written communication aid, we were sharing these ideas. Does that make sense? So lots of sharing going on. And what we did more recently is we asked people, so back in 2016, I said, do you have a care pathway in your organisation, in your speech therapy department? So when you get a referral for somebody with PPA, do you have a kind of pathway? We do this first, and then this second, and this third. We have that for people with other conditions like stroke and motor neuron disease, and children who need speech, all children. Children who might need speech therapy, there's care pathways. Back in 2016, less than 10% of speech therapists had care pathways. They didn't have a kind of pattern of what they did. We now know, when we survey people now, 12 people were saying, yes, that's 20% of the people we work with. We're talking about, or closer to 20%, we're talking about having care pathways. So more and more now, we know that the work we're doing is helping trust build in clearer pathways. We ask people, what is the most common thing you're doing? What are you talking to people about in speech therapy? People said, we're talking about, in speech therapy, we do talk about lots of things, but some of the most common things we talk about are relationships. And I think this ties back really nicely to what Jeff was emphasising, and Matt and Leslie and Mike. We talk about the importance of meeting other people and how it feels to live with a language difficulty. Speech therapists talk about, they try and get to know people with PPA. They don't just give you recipes. They're not just going to photocopy pieces of paper and make you do homework. They actually try and get to know you and do what's going to be helpful for you. And they also talk about therapy. Okay? And I think that's really important, because sometimes I meet people, in the past I've met people with PPA and they say, well, the speech therapist just photocopied a piece of paper for me and I don't need to know the names of all the birds in the south of France, and that's what they wanted me to learn. So now people take a much more person-centred approach. And I said, we asked people, what do you think is the most important thing a speech therapist can do for people with PPA? And I find this very interesting, because this is exactly what Mike said. Mike said after the group he felt a lot more confident, and it ties back to what Jeff said. We can't work miracles, but people say they feel more confident, and speech therapists are really trying to help you with your relationships, your word finding, your frustration, to feel more confident. Okay? So, what are we trying to do? Well, in our group, we're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep holding these meetings, and we're trying to develop more and more resources so that speech therapists don't have to waste their time looking for things. They've got the things they need at their fingertips, especially for PPA. So they've got that knowledge at their fingertips. And we're trying to design a care pathway. Some of you, I've already bothered you about this. So it's not me trying to design it. I've been asking people about this. What should a care pathway look like, so that the speech therapists know what they should build in? And then another thing to say, Nikki and I have just been talking about this morning, is, and I mentioned this earlier, to see a speech therapist, you have to jump over a lot of barriers to see a speech therapist, and we're not always funded. So if you want to see a speech therapist, you generally have to go to your GP. And you have to say, please refer me to the speech therapist. But not all GPs know exactly where that speech therapist would be. So although we can't give you the names of, Anna Volkmer or, I don't know, Alice or Elizabeth, that's not going to get you to the speech therapist. What you need is the secret referral form and email address. So we're going to try and make a list of the central email addresses for all the people who are not for the personally the people, but for their services where you need to get that referral to. Okay? So that's the kind of thing we're working on, to try and help you all get to some of those mysterious speech therapists who are heading in the right direction. Things are changing, and we here in this network are really trying to give them a leg up and try and help make those changes. So thank you very much, and that's the end of my talk.
Hello everyone, lovely to see you all. I know, very conscious right now, I'm the only thing between you and lunch, so I will try and be as quick as possible. But equally, if I'm talking too fast, just scowl at me and I'll get the message very quickly. My name, as it says there, is Ollie Hayes. I work for RDS, and I also work on the RD Talk grant with Professor Josh Stobb. Some of you will have heard about this intervention already, but for those of you who haven't, we're introducing a new web-based caregiver educational program, which is called Better Living with Non-Memory-Led Dementia. And that's Ollie for short, so if you see that in emails and things, that's what we mean. It is for carers, just to emphasise, so that's the portion of the room that this is for today. And there are 3 different but equivalent programs. We have one designed for PPA, one designed for PCA, and one designed for FTD. So PPA, again, is the relevant one for you today. Now what makes this interesting, hopefully, is that it was co-designed with 22 families with lived experience, just like yourselves. So it will contain the knowledge and experience from people like you in this room and people who have been there before, as well as all of the experience from people like Nikki and Anna as well. As I said, it's online. This is what it would look like. You wouldn't see this one, so ignore that part of it. You can see the PPA one, and that's the landing page if you signed up and were selected to participate. So taking a slightly closer look, here's a little sneak peek for everyone on the inside. It has 6 chapters, and it covers topics like symptoms, how to help the person living with dementia live better, and crucially as well, helping to live you live. Oof, I got that all wrong. Helping you to live better. It also gives you directions to organisations that can help and other peer support options too. So, yes. So this next slide is a little very brief overview of the structure of the intervention. So if you decided to participate, you would answer some online questionnaires for us. People receiving the intervention would then have an onboarding session with Dr. Ida Suarez-Gonzalez, who's one of the very best, and you would then receive access to the intervention itself. The intervention is self-paced, 8 weeks of e-learning, and crucially all the materials are downloadable, so you don't need to worry about writing notes or worry that it will disappear when you're finished. That will be with you for good. After completing all of this, we'd ask you to complete the questionnaires again, and then do an interview after the questionnaires to kind of get your opinions on how it went. So, with that in mind, the main goal of this at this stage is to find out how it went for you and what you think of it, because it's in development. So, we're aiming to recruit 238 people for this trial. 119 would receive this immediately. The remaining 119 would also receive it, but you'd be waiting 6 months to receive it before you started. And the reason for this is because it's a methodological requirement of the type of trial we're doing. We're doing a randomized control trial, which is a fancy way of saying that it's the gold standard in the industry. So it's the best way to help us evaluate whether it's any good for you. We hope it is, we think it is, but we need to know that it is. The main things that we want to find out about and that we hope it can do for you is change how you perceive the condition, change how you relate to the condition and the person living with dementia affected by the condition, to improve the quality of support that you're able to provide to yourself and to your loved one, and how capable you feel in yourself to provide this support. These are the kind of main outcomes that we're looking for. So hopefully, that's a very quick whistle-stop tour that gets you to lunch soup. It gives you enough of an overview to come and ask me questions during lunch if you're interested. And this email address here is the all-important one. So if you have any questions or are interested in learning more about the study, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We'll be happy to answer any questions, as well as I will out there. So thank you very much. I believe that's lunch now, Nikki, yeah? Before I go. Anyway, thank you for your time.